Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome once again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast detailing Knoxville news and events, brought to you by the fine folks at CompassKnox.com. If you want to know more about CompassKnox.com, give us a look at CompassKnox.com. I'm Jesse Mayshark. My colleague and cohort and co-publisher and co-everything is Scott Barker. How are you doing today, Scott?
Doing okay, Jesse. It's a little warm, but it's better than it has been in Great Britain.
I was going to say, yeah, if you look at some of those numbers across the globe right now, not just Great Britain, but I saw a map the other day, Spain, Iran, China, everybody is having... if not unprecedented, at least very unusual heat. So I guess we're kind of right in the mix there, and we're not here to talk about climate change, but we're being affected by it anyway.
We're being affected by it, yes.
So everybody out there, stay cool. We do have a lot of things to talk about this week that are not the weather. Actually, a fair amount of news. This is kind of a newsy July between... The election's coming up August 4th, and lots of other things happening here on the local scene. So first of all, I want to mention that coming up in our interview segment, we're going to have a conversation with City Councilman Tommy Smith. He's going to be talking to us about some of the things happening in South Knoxville, which he represents. A lot of activity down there these days. We also are going to touch on the upcoming election on August 4th, talk about that. We have an update today. We're recording this on Friday, and we had a story today on some evolution in the projected costs and payment options for the downtown stadium. So we'll talk about that.
Yes, we did.
Had some breaking news this week about a proposed Parents' Bill of Rights in the school system. And to start us off, we also had some activity at the Knoxville Police Department with our new police chief, Paul Noel, facing, we've been talking about, it'll be interesting to see what happens and how he responds when he faces sort of difficult situations, and we got sort of a taste of that this week.
Yeah, he had his first kind of real leadership test, I think you could call it. I have called it over since he was hired. He had some disciplinary issues he had to deal with. He had two officers in separate incidents get charged with DUI in other jurisdictions. He had to deal with that. He basically reassigned them, and then he had a real big issue that he had to deal with his a couple of commanders, and it was really kind of at least so far, probably the most important moment he's had Lieutenant Don Jones and Captain Don Jones and Lieutenant Michael Earlywine, who were disciplined as the result of an internal affairs investigation that just recently wrapped up into basically covering up racially charged language that an officer had used in creating a hostile work environment.
Right. A black officer had complained about racial harassment, essentially.
A black officer had complained. Actually, there were 2 investigations. There was one into the initial complaint of the statements that had been made, and then there was another one that the officer filed alleging that the commanders who had testified in the first investigation had lied. So when the dust settled last week, Earlywine was fired. The Internal Affairs investigation found that he had lied. Captain Jones, who's been the acting commander of the patrol division. I mean, that's one of the 3 divisions that KPD is divided into. So he was a top level commander, and he was suspended for 10 days without pay. And we'll see if he will continue to be the acting commander of the patrol division as we move forward. But that was kind of a big issue. One of the things that came out of that was Chief Noel sent an email to all the employees at KPD that explaining what happened and really making a pledge that discipline would be meted out fairly and without regard to your command status. And I think that the message was that I'm going to be fair with everybody regardless of their rank. And it turned out that had been one of the issues that especially lieutenants that he'd been meeting with as he's been getting to know the department, they'd come up with. They'd said, well, the higher ups get it a little easier than the rest of us when discipline comes out, and he's pledged to change that, and I think that his actions do send that message.
Yeah, I mean a pretty strong message. It appears to be from the outside. Yes. Very interesting to see how that is received and perceived internally as sort of like a first major statement by the new boss. Clearly, he hopes that the rank and file and the command staff get the message that he's not going to tolerate people not being honest, and also the kinds of behavior that were alleged in the complaints. So I guess we'll just kind of have to see what the impact of that is.
Yeah, I think that it was probably well received at the rank of lieutenant and below. Don't know so much about the others, but probably if they want to be effective with and with Chief Noel, I think that they'll need to kind of get with the program if they want to do that. I think that he is kind of setting down the law about how he is going to run the department, and that's one of the things that will be an adjustment, and we'll see how the department does adjust to him and how he adjusts to the department. One other thing that it was a busy week for KPD. We ran a story on the homicide count in Knoxville this year. The previous 2 years, we'd set records for the number of homicides. In 2021, there were 37. 2022, there were 41.
Oh, you mean 37 and 20 and 41 and 21?
20 and 21. There was 37 and 41. The average over the previous 10 years was about 20. So it was a substantial increase. And the good news that has come out of our analysis of the data is that the count is down. This year at the halfway point, there were 14 homicides in the city. At the halfway point last year, which was the record-setting year, there had been 22. So now that can change in an instant. In fact, between the time that sat down with an interview with KPD and the time the story ran, there had been 3 homicides, and it was less than a week. So that can change. but at least for the beginning of the year, that's the case. The main source I talked to was Lieutenant Ryan Morrow, who is who heads up the violent crimes unit, which they investigate all the murders in the city, and he attributed the reduction, if it can be attributed to anything. I mean, nobody even knows why the surge happened in the first place, but if you can attribute the reduction to anything, KPD has a unit now that does enhanced traffic enforcement, and they with the aim of catching people who are violating parole and that sort of thing. And they've actually taken close to 300 guns off the street in the first 6 months of the year.
And those would mostly be from convicted felons, I guess, who aren't allowed to have them, right?
Yeah, convicted felons, or they might be stolen firearms if they've been reported. Most don't get reported, but if they have been reported, I mean, those kinds of things. They're firearms violations. They might be also someone who might legally possess a firearm, but illegally is possessing other substances in their vehicle. So, I mean, there are all kinds of ways to.
You can turn a legal firearm into an illegal one pretty quickly, depending on the circumstances you're carrying it in.
But that's close to 300 guns that are off the streets that he points out that those are guns that won't be used in murders or other felonies. So anyway, and of course they he went back to the fundamental issue that they face is that people don't speak up. They need. He really emphasized the need to have eyewitnesses. So people that either actually witness the killing or see a vehicle leaving the scene, things like that. They need to come forward, or the chances of them clearing the case are just really, really slim.
Which, of course, really gets to the whole issue of trust in the community, relations between the community and the police force, which have been strained often, as they have been in many parts of the country.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, on a completely different front, the school system this week, we had a little bit of an interesting thing. Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs getting involved in some school board races. He has endorsed two of the incumbents who are running, School Board Chair Christy Christie and Betsy Henderson in the 6th District, both Republicans. And then he came out this week and endorsed Will Edwards, who's the Republican running in the 4th District. It's not super unusual for county mayors to be engaged in school board races, either officially or unofficially. Former County Mayor Tim Burchett, people might remember, was quite active in encouraging people to run back when he was kind of feuding with former Superintendent Jim McIntyre. So that involvement in itself wasn't that unusual, but Jacobs went a bit further, and he and his office this week actually came out with a draft of something they're calling a Parents' Bill of Rights that apparently Jacobs has developed along with Betsy Henderson, the 6th District current board member, which is intended to, so the goal is to present this as a school board policy that could be adopted probably this fall after these school board elections. And the case Jacobs is making is that he wants these Republican candidates to be elected to the board in order to have enough votes to pass this Parents' Bill of Rights. Now, I don't know whether, if you just propose this Parents' Bill of Rights right now with the existing board, like it may pass. So I don't know 100% that what Jacobs is saying is true, that like he has to have these board, but that's the case he's making. Why he's supporting these board members is he wants them to support this Parents' Bill of Rights. The Parents' Bill of Rights itself, if you read it, and we actually broke this story too this week, we have a draft of it up on our website, is nothing in it leaps out as being necessarily super controversial. A lot of it really restates rights that parents already have. Parents already have a fair number of legal rights when it comes to their children and to dealing with the school system. There's things on it like the right to review curriculum materials. We already have that. Curriculum materials in Knox County are online. Yep. You can go and read all of them. I've looked at a fair amount of them. So some of it is just kind of affirmatively stating things that already exist, but kind of putting it in this, prioritizing it, I guess you could say, by putting it in, calling it a Parents' Bill of Rights. There's a few specific things that maybe aren't spelled out in current policy. One of them is that parents would have the right to have access to biographical materials and any presentation materials that are going to be used by visiting speakers. So if somebody's coming in to speak to a class, or give a special presentation in the auditorium, like some of us used to get called out of class to go watch people give talks about one thing or another, that parents would have access to that material too. It does tie into this sort of broader, both in the state and nationwide push by the Republican Party specifically to kind of try to make a partisan issue out of parents' rights. And we've seen it play into issues like what they call critical race theory, which, as we all know, critical race theory is not really something that's discussed in K-12 schools, but people kind of use that to refer to, it seems like, sort of any kind of teaching or discussion of, say, American racial history that they're uncomfortable with or that they don't necessarily want their kids exposed to. So, parents' rights has come to take on a bit of a partisan cast. But again, looking at what's being proposed here, it'll be interesting to see what the actual discussion of this is if and when it gets presented as a policy, because nothing leaps out of it that seems super controversial, I don't think, on the front end.
No, I didn't think so when I looked at it. Again, the speaker bio thing did, but a lot of times I think teachers will maybe send something home with their students saying, next week we're going to have so-and-so in. We're going to have Jesse Mayshark in to talk about journalism. And parents may or may not even pay attention. It's one of those things that little Johnny's home from school and he's got homework to do and everything else. He might or might not remember to give mom this, and the hectic everyday thing. So I think a lot of these things teachers probably already do.
Yeah.
And so, I'm not, a cynic might say that, well, since most of these things are already done, that this is a political ploy to make it look like it's something that needs to be corrected when it actually isn't anything there isn't anything that needs to be corrected. But you're right. I mean, it does put an emphasis on it and puts it in one place. So, I guess it depends on how you view these things. As to the efficacy of coming up with a Parents' Bill of Rights.
Yeah, and I think that political ploy is a fair way to describe it, or at least a political. When you introduce something like this in the middle of a campaign, and you say that we need these candidates elected in order to enact this, clearly there's a political element to it. That's not to say that Mayor Jacobs and Betsy Henderson aren't very sincere in pushing it. I think this is something that they value. But certainly it's being used as a political, they're trying to get parents to come out and vote and say, yes, I want this. And, I guess we'll see what the effect of that is. I do think it's kind of funny, if you talk to teachers about this kind of thing, I think the reaction you're most likely to get is, well, we wish we had more parents who actually cared and were engaged, because in general, I think schools and teachers often feel much more sort of abandoned by parents than they feel overwhelmed by them.
Right.
But we'll see how all that goes. Big news that we did break on Friday to do with the stadium. Tell us what's going on with the stadium, Scott.
Well, yes, this is the multi-use stadium that's going to be home to the Tennessee Smokies. The goal is to have them here by 2025, and
previously 2024.
Previously 2024, and one of the reasons that it was previously 2024 and now is 2025 is the increase, dramatic increase in construction materials costs. They decided to kind of hold off, kind of put it on pause for a little bit to see if prices would come down. Construction materials costs have gone up by about 20% over the past year, which is just a phenomenal, astronomical leap, and that no one anticipated before. Anyway, so it's delayed the project so far, at least a couple of months. It turns out that the price is going to be sufficiently increased to where they need more money to build the stadium. And
right, we've been talking about an $80 million
80 million,
stadium,
give or 80 million, give or take $1 million, but around $80 million. If you add 20% to that, and I think that's a little crude to do because there's more involved than just materials costs, and there's labor costs, there's this, that, and the other. But if you just add 20% to that, we're talking, we're getting close to $100 million stadium, $96 million stadium or so. We don't know the amount. That's one thing that they've played close to the vest. But what we did find out is that during a high-level meeting and previous meetings as well, but it really had a high-level meeting between Smokies owner Randy Boyd and the two mayors on Wednesday, and basically the deal is that Boyd himself is going to loan this shortfall money to the Sports Authority. Of course, they will have to pay it back, but that would be a way to keep the stadium moving forward, and the public expense on the front end will remain the same. And so I think that is, it's kind of the working.
Because they wouldn't have to add that to the bond amount that they're
right. Yeah. The Sports Authority is borrowing $65 million now, and that's kind of capped at $65 million.
They're authorized.
They're authorized to borrow up to $65 million. The state's kicking in $13.5 million. Boyd's already paying about $6 million. So it's those are the upfront costs. There's always the debt on the bond issue, and if Boyd does loan the money to the Sports Authority, that loan is going to have to be paid back. And currently, there isn't a revenue stream that's been publicly identified that would pay that. So that is the challenge for City Mayor Indy and Canyon County Mayor Glenn Jacobs to come up with a way to a revenue stream to pay that. And be palatable to the taxpayers, who not only will the taxpayers will own the stadium, so there's so far there's been a lot of support for the stadium. There have been vocal opponents, but this will give the opponents of the stadium more fodder. And also, the people who might be on the fence might say, "Well, no, it's getting a little too expensive." Mm-hmm. So we'll see how that goes. Like I said, one of the things is we don't have the details of, the terms of the loan. For all we know, he's going to give the city and the county a no interest loan.
Well, it seems like it would only be valuable to them if he gives them a better deal than they would get on the bond market, right?
Well, one would think, and of course, short-term interest rates continue to rise. We point that out in the story, and it's getting more expensive to borrow money. Yeah. I think that's where the negotiations stand at this point. It seems we don't have. They are trying to keep a close lid on it. The word does keep seeping out here and there because. In a project this big, so lots of people know about it. So.
And there's a lot of interest in it.
There is.
And I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that the city and county options for funding sources to pay any extra debt are pretty limited. First of all, by state law, they cannot use property tax revenues to pay for a stadium. Right. That's off the table, and they've already dedicated all of their anticipated revenues from the stadium, the extra sales taxes, mm-hmm. and even some of the incremental property taxes from the surrounding private development mm-hmm. to pay for various aspects of the project. The county has said all along that they intend to pay their portion of the whatever annual payment they have to make out of hotel motel taxes. They do get a lot of hotel motel taxes. They're in no way dedicating all of their hotel motel taxes to the stadium. So depending on how much that extra every year is, maybe the county would say, well, we'll just spend more of our hotel motel taxes on that. But, they rely on those hotel motel taxes for other things too. In recent years, they've used them to help out the zoo, for example. There are other things in Knoxville and Knox County. For hotel motel taxes are supposed to pay for tourism-oriented projects, but there's a lot more than just the stadium, people asking for that money. So it's not like it's going to cost somebody, even if it's not.
Yes.
And hotel motel taxes are mostly not paid by Knox County residents. That's been one of the selling points. Hey, this is going to be paid by visitors from out of town. But again, that's money that's already being used to pay for other things.
Right.
And the city doesn't even have that because they already dedicate their hotel motel taxes to the convention center, which we're still paying off. So their options are going to be even more constrained. It's not like there's just some magic pot of money that they can say, oh, we found this on a shelf somewhere.
That's right. There isn't. I mean, in case anyone's wondering, the property tax increase that the city approved is they can't use any revenues from that to pay for the stadium. So that's one of the things that we're still working on to try to get details of. The two big issues there would be what is the amount of the shortfall that needs to be covered, and what would be the terms and conditions of the loan used to cover it. So we're diligently trying to track that down, and we'll report it as soon as we find out.
All right, more to come there. Also want to remind everybody, early voting is still going on all this coming week. It actually ends next Saturday, July 30th. So if you have not yet early voted, like me, I have not yet early voted, but I'm going to. If Chris Davis, the Knox County Election Administrator, is listening, I promise you, Chris, I am going to early vote this week. I am an early voter. Scott, I know you're an Election Day voter, and you'll do that.
I tend to be an Election Day voter. Yeah, I like the it's almost a holiday aspect to it. So I kind of enjoy that. I have voted early from time to time. I could vote early this time around, but more than likely I'll wait till Election Day to go to my local precinct. It's only a couple blocks away, nice and convenient for me. And either way, I'm going to vote.
Yes. I think that's the thing. And our early voting numbers, which we've been tracking every day, running, I guess, about what you'd expect. This is usually a pretty low turnout election, and so far it's a pretty low turnout. I mean, we're sitting here halfway through early voting, and we have fewer than 10,000 votes cast out of how many? 200,000 eligible voters?
Yeah,
or more
something like 200,000. Yeah, it's a low turnout election. People are turning. Like I said, about 8,000 after the first 5 days. It'll be a little bit more than that by the time this airs. Which means, the fewer who vote, the more the votes count. So
you can find all the early voting information at knoxvotes.org, a website set up by the Election Commission. And you can find out more about all of the contested local races at compassknox.com, where we have moved all of our election coverage outside our paywall, so it is free to read and share. If you're not a subscriber, great opportunity to read a little bit of what we do. If you are a subscriber and you want to share all of our good work with your friends and colleagues and anybody who needs to know about the election, please point them there. All right, so now we are up to our interview segment for the week, and we have City Councilman Tommy Smith, who's going to tell us a little bit about South Knoxville.
Yeah, Councilman Smith represents South Knoxville and Fort Sanders. He always makes sure that you include Fort Sanders.
And Fort Sanders, absolutely.
And Fort Sanders. But he represents that area. There's a lot going on down in South Knoxville, and he talks about some of those things in the segment. So
let's go to the tape.
City Council Member Tommy Smith. Tommy, welcome. Tommy represents the 1st District in the city of Knoxville, which is South Knoxville and Fort Sanders. And we're going to take a conversational journey south across the river and talk about some things that are going on in his district. Councilman Smith, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Had trouble sleeping, ready to go.
Well, we'll try not to be too mean to you, so you won't have to worry about that too much on this trip anyway. One of the things we wanted to talk about, something that's been in the news in South regarding South Knoxville recently, has been the Alcoa Highway corridor plan, which County Commission and City Council both are considering this month. It basically talks about how to develop the corridor along Alcoa Highway in the wake of the reconstruction that's been going on. Tennessee Department of Transportation. What are your thoughts on that plan, and what are people in your district talking about it, saying about it?
Well, it's really important because that community's, I have to say, been under construction for over a decade. So it's kind of hard to, we've seen this movie a little bit before on Chapman Highway when we closed the Henley Street Bridge to work on that as a city. A lot of small businesses suffered and never came back. And Alcoa Highway is no different in that regard. With that said, it was one of the most dangerous, most trafficked highways in the whole state. So it was worthy of the investment to make sure that people can commute safely on there. But as I think about cities, we make safe spaces for cars, and now it's time to make sure that the village returns. And so the thing that's really impressive about this is that it was neighborhood led. While expert planners and Knox County Planning had to get involved, it's city, county jurisdiction. Alcoa Highway kind of bounces back and forth between the city and county, all the way out to Blood County. The neighborhood really initiated what they desired for the community, and were able to articulate it, how they want pedestrian activity to be, where would they desire new businesses come back, where would they welcome new residents. They're very thoughtful about understanding, in order to have commercial, you got to have rooftops. And so they are welcoming of more density along that highway. And I think the kind of next stage beyond hopefully approval of this plan, which I assume will happen with ease, I think, is that creating a unique theme corridor, whatever you want to call it, so that signage looks the same, landscape design looks the same. I think that would require an overlay of some sort, but I'm here for that. So I'm really excited about it. It's not going to be a short return to what it was. It won't be what it was because of the access points of the highway. It makes it really hard to have walkable commercial little village shopping areas. So it'll be something new that it wasn't before. And this is the first stage. So I'm excited about hundreds of people across the county and city that have come together and said, this is the plan that we like.
One of the aspects of the plan, the TDOT construction kind of made it very difficult to get directly to the businesses that are next to Alcoa Highway, which was always a very dangerous proposition. I was always reluctant to even turn right off of Alcoa Highway, and avoided like the plague the necessity of turning left. Now you have to get off at one of a couple of exits essentially, and use access roads. And while that does make it more difficult for people traveling the highway to use the businesses, as you referred to, the focus now is going to have to be on the area residents and making those businesses cater to them as much, if not more, than people who are just traveling on Alcoa Highway.
Yeah, it's almost as hard to make a spontaneous exit off of that than it is like you have to know where you're going and turn on Google Maps before you can know how to get off Alcoa Highway. So while it's safe for the cars who aren't stopping, which is the majority of the traffic, it does create unique challenges for the people that live there. But also, I mean, the biggest complaint I've heard recently over the past year is even as Alcoa Highway is kind of taking shapes and there's roundabouts off the exits, is the instructions you have to give a friend to come visit are quite challenging, and Google Maps aren't up to date yet. So like, it's not easy to go visit or transact or even walk over there. But the Knoxville Blount County Greenway is still a dream. So it's not just for cars, but for now it is. It seems that way.
Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of growth in South Knoxville in general, because so in this case, you're talking about bringing in maybe some new residences, multifamily residences along that Alcoa Highway corridor. But there's a tremendous amount of development going on all across South Knoxville, both inside the city and especially now outside the city and some of those more rural areas that had been untouched. But now we're seeing lots of proposals along John Sevier Highway and some other places. And I know that your district is just the city part of all of that, which is already pretty well built up, although there's some, ongoing expansion there in various places. But how well, I mean, we're talking about Alcoa Highway here. Obviously, Chapman Highway is the other major north-south corridor.
Yeah.
How well is South Knoxville equipped infrastructure-wise to handle new growth, to handle, I mean, like you say, bringing in more residents creates, more commercial opportunity. But aside from the Alcoa Highway project, which is millions and millions of dollars in state money there, how well equipped is South Knoxville to sort of absorb all of this new interest?
There's TDOT holds the keys to improving Chapman Highway. I would say Chapman Highway survives as it is now, but it'll quickly be insufficient. And so TDOT, if you think about Chapman Highway, TDOT has funded and developed, and enhancements have been made on Chapman Highway all the way from Pigeon Forge to the city line. So the city gap of the city part of Chapman Highway is the only part of Chapman Highway that hasn't been implemented yet. And so it's the most complex. The good thing is Mayor Rahero's administration put together the Chapman Highway Improvement Plan. So the work that's going on now between the city administration and TDOT is marrying safety desires for TDOT, which we all desire safety, but safety, single focus kind of TDOT is safety. We have some different things we want to tackle as part of ours, which is pedestrian safety, cycler safety, and those type of things. So marrying those two desires for the city portion of Chapman Highway is the greatest, will have the greatest impact on South Knoxville infrastructure possible. That is for, traditional car commute. But, the city recently received a grant from TDOT to design the pedestrian route across James White Parkway. So if you'll remember, the city now owns everything from the water south into the urban wilderness Gateway Park. But we still have the vision for a pedestrian path across James White Parkway. Now, I always have to give this disclaimer because I'm reminded by South Haven, Lindbergh Forest, and all the other neighborhoods near there that James White Parkway will always be at least 4 lanes. It's not going to be reduced. So I just want to make sure that's part of this for any of my South Knoxville people listening. That disclaimer is always included. But I do think that there's a unique, not only is South Knoxville unique in that the urban wilderness and it's most probably the most friendly pedestrian and cycling part of the community. We wanted to kind of connect that to the rest of Knoxville. So there's still a vision to bring walking and cycling across James White Parkway to connect it to Morningside Park. And to make that connection stronger, there's a new development that's been proposed on the north side of the river where James White Parkway meets Riverside. And I think that will be, as I've seen the plans for that, will be very well mixed use, living, shopping, eating, dining, dwelling on the beside the park there. So Nidner Quarter Park. So the connection between South Knoxville and the rest of the city will not just be accessible by cars, but I think in multiple ways by feet and small tire.
Well, got one more question about development in South Knoxville, and we can move to other topics. We've got the two corridors, but then there are also a couple of nodes where development has been. I think one you could say that that Vestal is
Yes.
an area that has kind of got at least the street infrastructure in place. You've also got the Sevier Avenue area where you've got a lot of development that's going on. Talk about those and how they can help
Yeah.
kind of expand development away from this. I guess especially the Chapman Highway corridor.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we develop village corners or nodes in those areas, like you mentioned, where people they don't just sleep or they don't just visit. They do all, the core of their living there. They recreate, they eat, drink, live in certain little village corners. Vestal has the bones. It's just got a lot of empty buildings. And so it's really hard to be a first mover over there. We've got a few businesses that are interested in that. There's some property that's turned over on that corner. I really want people to dwell on that corner. It's the best thing for a community to have a place that's active and lively. Blight is never a good strategy. The Sevier Avenue is at a little different stage in that it's received the flood of interest. And so now it's how to do that really well as it crosses a certain 50% threshold. I made that number up. But essentially, if you think back to the Alcoa Highway Vision Plan, we talked a little bit about it. So the South Waterfront is very similar in that the city and that in the Alcoa circumstance, the county as well has said, we have a vision for this area. Here's the plan. It takes years and years and years of nurturing before businesses feel like taking a shot at it. And they need to see commitment. And so that's what that Alcoa plan, and the South Waterfront plan was no different 16, 17 years ago. The interesting thing about these corners is that Vestal needs parking. And one might say that Sevier Avenue near term needs parking. And it's this weird dynamic in that we've got a code that is built to reduce the amount of parking that happens. But culturally, we're not there yet. So it's as if from a parking, dwelling, residential kind of living, our code has put a marker out into the future before our culture is there. So it's this really interesting dynamic of the code's built for people to live and sit and walk and go home and just walk to these restaurants and stuff. But you've just got so much attention from elsewhere that people still want to drive over, and even people that live nearby still want to drive, a quarter mile and park to the thing. So culturally, we're not where our code is out into the future. And so from an infrastructure or planning standpoint, it just creates this kind of delayed fit, right? So we've created these spaces that are highly attractive, but everyone still wants to come park right beside it. And it's just, it's a challenge. And so we've got a residential parking pilot on Phillips Avenue. That's an example of a measure to bridge the gap between what we're building and culturally where we are. So a lot of the development's been on the east side of Chapman Highway. I imagine over the next few years, you're going to see quick attention given to development on the west side of Chapman Highway, down West Blunt Avenue. Back to the infrastructure question, Jesse, there's a little tunnel, one-lane tunnel that you have to go through. So you can build as much housing as you want, but if it all has to pinch beneath one single lane tunnel, we're in trouble. But, there are other areas where you can reduce pressure, but that tunnel is not one of them. So there'll be different challenges over there. The key is that we develop a vision and processes that guide what we want. And I think if I just go a little longer here, I think there's a new energy around creating the next chapter or vision for the entire waterfront. So the South Waterfront was an intentional thing by previous administrations that we've just still not even realized the full potential of. But the city should think about the waterfront and is beginning to think about the waterfront holistically. You've got um, the Riverline project that's been headed out of some University of Tennessee. The South Waterfront's bubbling up. There's discussions of a pedestrian bridge and connecting to UT. So we should all think as wide as possible, as wide as the Tennessee River is. It starts here, and we just have not, as a community, said what we want that to be yet. So I think holistic riverfront vision 2.0, or for the first time, would be really helpful, I think.
Well, Councilman, one other thing that we can move to kind of some other topics. One thing you mentioned before we started this was litter and a kind of strategy to address litter in the district. Talk about a little bit about the scope of the problem and
Sure.
what needs to be done about it.
I really feel like as a city, it's hard to keep up with our imaginations so that the things that we've built are maintained and kept well. And so more people and everything else brings challenges with litter. I'm really excited that this budget that we just passed included two big kind of litter priorities for me. One is Fort Sanders. Most people don't realize that Fort Sanders is the most densely populated neighborhood in the whole city, thanks to a few thousand students. And so that just brings unique challenges for trash and waste pickup. There's obviously that level of density creates, you can't, it's hard to even sweep the streets with cars against the curb. And so much so that they have to schedule times to remove cars from the streets to clean. So we doubled the amount of waste and litter pickup in Fort Sanders. There's a lot of folks who've lived there for a long time that aren't students. There's professors. So that was one thing we just passed. And then we collaborated with the county on a joint litter program specifically to strategize around the root causes of it. Where does it happen most? Most research points to litter being a point of consumption issue where somebody waits for a bus while they eat a snack and they either intentionally throw it down or they forget about it as they get on, or around dining establishments. That's where litter is a lot of times. So the city and county are going to put together some programs that I think will be kind of PSA awareness oriented, but also pilot some new things. The county funded a environmental officer in the sheriff's department. So now there's some enforcement to intentional litter. I think we're all human and at risk of accidental litter. Things aren't, covered on the truck, or, a 4-year-old throws their sucker wrapper out while dad's screaming, please don't do that. That's happened for me. So intentional litter, I think, is something that we can help with. And I've been advocating for other measures, like we should have recycling or waste bins with every bus stop. We've done a good job at placing them at highly trafficked areas around the city. But back to the point of consumption example I gave earlier, bus stops will become more and more important. We're in the middle of CAT Reimagined, and so the idea is that we have more frequency on the existing routes, and so hopefully more people will be able to ride more buses because it'll be more reliable, and that brings risk of litter. So I think when we can intentionally place bins, places for people to utilize, I think we'll see that reduction too.
And I know your county counterpart, Commissioner Carson Daly, who represents South Knox County, is also a very strong champion for anti-litter efforts. That's kind of been a consistent theme for him on county commission.
Yeah, I joke with Carson that who can be for litter, but he's definitely the most against. So I'm right. He and I kind of grabbed the same torch, and I just think it's important that. It also, there's a lot of research that suggests, and Carson and I have talked about this, that it's a little bit contagious, and that you keep up with the area that's already kept up. So that's what we're trying to do.
All right. Well, lots of other things we could talk to you about in South Knoxville because there's so much going on there now. So I'm sure we will have you back to talk about some of those things. But for now, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Absolutely. Thanks. I'll be back if you invite me. So everybody listening, if I'm not back soon, it's because they didn't invite me. So pressure's on you guys.
Sounds good. Thanks, Councilman.
All right. See you guys.
All right, and thanks again to Councilman Smith for joining us. So now we are to the Q&A portion of our podcast. Every week we go on our subscriber-only Facebook page, the Compass Colloquy, one of the many amenities available to Compass subscribers. And we ask our readers if there's anything in particular they want to hear about on the podcast. We got a few suggestions this week, and one that I think we can maybe shed a little light on is somebody asked, is there a plan to improve the bus shelter situation in Knoxville? As we know, Knoxville Area Transit runs buses all over the city. There are bus stops all over the city, but a lot of those bus stops are basically just a sign on a pole. A lot of them do not have any kind of shelter or bench, any place to sit. So, Scott, what do we know about this?
Well, the short answer is yes, there is a plan. In fact, last year, the city appropriated an extra $300,000 for bus shelter upgrades, and then received a $900,000 grant through the Federal Improves Act, so now it was $1.2 million in additional funding for shelters, and then for new bus shelters. And CAT, Knox Area Transit, is developed a priority list for installing or upgrading bus shelters all throughout their system, and so that is underway now. One of the things that people might not realize, and I think from your time in city government, you know this, it's kind of expensive to build bus shelters. It's not a matter of just putting 4 poles in a roof over the top. The shelters are have to be built to standard. There's standard shelters. They have to have benches. They have to have paving. They have to have accessibility for people with wheelchairs. So there's a lot going on. So you need more space than you might think. It's more than just a bench, and in a lot of places in the city you don't have that. It has to be engineered in other places. So it takes some planning. It takes some money, but there is a commitment from CAT to upgrade their bus shelters or the bus stops throughout the city over the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it is. I mean, a lot of the places where you see bus stops, they're literally just in like a small grassy median or something by the side of they're not even a sidewalk, and mm-hmm. they're right up against the street. And so to put in a shelter at a lot of these places, because you've got to have some setback from traffic, there's probably places where they would need to actually acquire some adjacent property and
right.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, several years ago, I lived in Northwest Knoxville, and my closest bus stop, and I rode the bus occasionally, was on Western Avenue, mm-hmm. And at a very busy stretch of Western Avenue, and it was just a sign on a pole, and just kind of grass there that you went to. There wasn't even a sidewalk to it, so it was it was, I won't say it was scary, but you were definitely, the hair on the back of your neck was up as you were looking around at the traffic and the speeds and everything. So it's and there are many places throughout the city that are that way, so it's I think a lot of people who do use CAT on a regular basis. And I'm just an occasional CAT rider, but those who use CAT on a regular basis will certainly, I think, would appreciate the effort anyway of having a place where if it's raining, they're not going to get completely soaked while they're waiting for the bus to take them to their work or the pharmacy or grocery store or wherever they're going.
All right. Well, thanks for the question, and that's what we know about bus shelters. So, looking ahead to the coming week, it's the last week of July. Again, typically kind of a quiet time of year, and again, not so quiet here this year. We have a few things coming up. County Commission meets on Monday, and they have a few interesting things on their agenda, but I think the most interesting thing, and the one that's going to generate the most discussion, is something that we have talked about on this podcast before, we have written about on our website, and it's a proposal to change how appeals can be filed of certain planning commission decisions when it comes to development plans. This most often comes up when somebody has a plan for, say, a subdivision, and they have to present a development plan to Planning Commission for approval. Planning Commission signs off on it, and some local neighbors or residents who are alarmed about either the size, the scale, the traffic, whatever, something about the development they don't like, they can appeal that decision right now to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And so there is a proposal from Mayor Glenn Jacobs, supported by a lot of, I think, developers, especially home builders in the county, to kind of take away that option of appealing to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and instead you would have to appeal directly to Chancery Court. Now there's a slight revision to that, which is would potentially give, so if somebody files an appeal, it would be up to the applicant, say the home builder in a lot of cases, to decide whether they want that appeal heard at the Board of Zoning Appeals or Chancery Court. The suspicion from a lot of people with the Knox County Planning Alliance, people who are in favor of sort of more planning, more required infrastructure before developments are approved, they think that this is all basically trying to make it harder for people to appeal or hold up or in any way delay some proposed new development, some proposed new subdivision. And so this is one of those issues that is pretty technical. It's a little hard to explain. However, I have heard from a few county commissioners already that they have received a tremendous volume of input on this, more than you would expect for something that is so sort of esoteric and technical. And I think the Knox County Planning Alliance and some of the homeowners associations and so forth in the county have gotten pretty active. And so the meeting on Monday, the County Commission meeting on Monday, if they stick to the schedule that's posted right now, is going to start with a public hearing on this. And there may well be a lot of people there to talk about it.
I would imagine so. That's it. It seems like homeowners groups are, neighborhood associations. They're better organized than they used to be. They tend to speak out more loudly. They come to
they're not
meetings.
Shy.
They come to meetings in greater numbers. So I would not be surprised if there is a large number of people there speaking out against this. It is, and even developers themselves are, and Mayor Jacobs has basically said the reason we're doing this is to speed up development.
Yeah.
And they make the argument that we are, there's a housing crisis. We are, developers say not a week passes by that I don't hear developers say we can't build houses fast enough, and so that balance between developers and people in the areas who already live in the areas they want to develop is kind of always a precarious one, and
the never-ending fight.
There are always tensions, no matter how well intentioned someone all sides are. So it will be interesting to see if how this ends up affecting developers, how the speed of development, the consideration of it, and if people will stop appealing if this goes through, when developers say, "Hey, we want to." We don't want to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. You got to go to court to stop us.
And it's worth noting that this is something that doesn't happen a whole lot. It has been happening. These appeals have been happening more in recent years, but that means, maybe they've had 3 or 4 a year instead of 1 or 2. It feels to me like this has become, as much as anything, a kind of symbolic fight between the kind of planning advocates and homeowners groups and developers. And Mayor Jacobs has been I would say, staunch friend of developers. He's generally pretty pro-development. He obviously wants to see more housing, especially built in Knox County. So I feel like there's some kind of political muscle flexing going on above and beyond just the actual, impact of the issue itself, which on paper doesn't look like it's something that actually happens very much.
Right.
So that's happening Monday, and then there's a couple things coming up on Tuesday.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier the stadium. The Sports Authority is meeting Tuesday morning. We doubt very seriously there's going to be any kind of proposal that they would vote on about the filling that funding gap. That's not going to happen. But they will be, I'm assuming, they don't have the agenda out yet, but I'm assuming that they'll be talking about those increased construction costs. They'll be talking about when they might be able to move forward with the project. Really, for the last several months, there's no progress made at all. So at least as far as moving forward with actually starting the project, most of the work has been trying to figure out how to re-engineer the project to not cost as much, but there's only so much of that you can do, and they have been doing that. But anyway, the Sports Authority will be meeting in the morning. Then in the evening, City Council will be meeting. The biggest item on the agenda that I've seen so far is they are going to recalibrate the tax rate. We talked about that earlier this year. They had the city passed the city council passed a property tax increase to pay for the budget, the current year's budget now, and but because of the recent reappraisal, as we've talked about, that rate will actually drop.
Right. They raised it to about 296, and now it's going to drop.
It's going to drop, and it's going to drop pretty significantly to 215, a little bit higher, more than 215, 2.1556 dollars per one.
Those extra hundredths of a penny add up. If it's spread across the whole city.
Yeah, and that's dollars per $100 of assessed value, and excuse me. And that's close. It's a little bit more, I think, than the initial projections were going to be. But now with this, people have been speculating, especially people whose property appraisals went up during the appraisal process. Had been talking about how much they're going to pay in taxes. There was. Some people were thinking they was going to double or triple it. It was not the case. But now you can actually tabulate your taxes, knowing what this rate is going to be. You can figure out how much it's going to be. So
the city taxes, at least.
The city taxes, not the county taxes, city taxes.
I think the county will probably come back and do this same thing next month, I imagine.
Yeah, they'll have to do the same thing. And both, so the property tax rates that the city and the county set in the spring or early summer,
when they adopted their
adopted their budgets, now those rates are going to go down. It's not really a tax cut, for the most part, but it's
right. You'll be paying a lower rate, but in a lot of cases on a much higher valuation.
Right.
So, a lot of people's tax bills, especially in the city where taxes went up, are still going to go up this year.
Yes.
Even though the tax rate's going to be lower.
Yes. So it can be confusing. It's very it's a strange thing to encounter the first time. I know the first time I encountered property tax formulas, I was completely bewildered. So it is. So it's anyway. That's going to be. They're going to be voting on that on Tuesday. That's probably the biggest thing on the budget. They have plenty of other things on the agenda.
I'm sure that won't be a hard vote for City Council though, because they're literally lowering the tax.
They
rate.
are lowering the tax rate. They're probably. And I wouldn't be surprised if one or two of them say, "Oh, we're going to lower the tax rate." Well, yeah, you are and you aren't, but you know. But anyway, I don't anticipate that being an issue whatsoever. But it is the most significant item on the agenda for Tuesday.
Then on Wednesday, the Knox County School Board is having one of their quarterly work sessions, which are basically chances for them to kind of have some big picture conversations about things that are hard for them to talk about on a month-to-month basis. A few things on the agenda. One is a report that they received earlier this year from the Tennessee Educators of Color Alliance, which the school system hired to kind of analyze and make recommendations about how they can do a better job of both retaining and recruiting specifically black teachers, racial minorities in the school system. This is something that new Superintendent John Ryswick has made a priority of, saying that he thinks it's really important that students see representation in their schools, that they have teachers or coaches or staff members and so on and so forth. Not only who look like them, but who have, maybe some shared background, some can kind of understand where they're coming from a little bit more. So they're going to be talking about that on Wednesday. That meeting's at 5 o'clock in the board's new boardroom in the Summer Place complex. And finally, as we mentioned earlier in the episode, early voting ends this week. It wraps up on Saturday, July 30th, ahead of the election, which is the following week on August 4th. So again, if you have not yet voted, take advantage of the many ways, places, and times that you can do that. And you can find that at knoxvotes.org. And we will be back next week to follow up on some of those things and whatever else happens between now and then.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.